Hello, very beautiful community. It's beginning to feel a little bit like Christmas. And this is my video with Christmas wine recommendations. But before I make Christmas wine recommendations, let me just say that at Christmas we think of people who are vulnerable, who need us to have them in our thoughts. And so I thought we'd start by tasting 3 wines from war zones or war zone adjacent areas. I've got a wine from Syria, I've got a wine from Ukraine, I've got a wine from Lebanon. And I just want to come in here and explain why I'm making a wine recommendation video before we go on. Haven't lost the plot. I'm not going to be making stamp collecting or furniture repair videos next. Here's my relationship with wine. One of the less important things I lost over the last year is the ability to drink a glass of wine for health reasons. But before, when my health was less bad, I used to have wine from time to time. But more importantly, I was deeply connected to the wine world. I knew people in the trade. I thought about wine a lot. And often when I'm really sick and I can't do anything, I lie here and I have sort of lovely thoughts about wine. So wine is for me unique among foods and beverages in offering an aesthetic experience and also offering time travel. Takes you back to a vintage years ago. Now you might say, but isn't wine for richies? And the answer is, yeah, a lot of great and expensive wine is. But number one, you can drink amazing artisanal wine that's high quality and distinctive for the price you'd pay in the supermarket for a modest bottle. And number two, I float. 10, 15 years ago, I bought a bit, and now I exchange or sell and buy. And so it's not something I make any money of, but it's also not something I spend much money on. It sort of floats itself for me. Okay, enough. Back to the video. Let's start with Syria. Now, of course, this is a little bit of an awkward setup. I've got some mushrooms here as well, beautiful community. It's an awkward setup because I can't sit at the table, because I can't stand since April. And of course, I'm not allowed to drink wines. I'm not going to swallow the wines as I taste them through with you, beautiful community. So this is special. All of these wines are not terribly expensive. They're not dirt cheap. They're all between 20 and 40 bucks. And this comes from the hills on the coast in Syria, near Latakia, also not far from what would have been the ancient city of Antioch. And there's a remarkable history of viticulture in that region, but not recently. And so the Saadi brothers, who also make wine in Lebanon, created this extraordinary project of viticultural revival in Syria. And for years, this has really been the only seriously made wine in Syria that actually is commercially viable. The way this has been made is remarkable. Often the grapes would be driven by cab for vinification from Syria to Lebanon. And this is quite a modernist wine. So it's not a wine that's particularly unusual, going to freak people out, but it also typically has something really transportational, really evocative, a certain kind of taste of the Middle East. And I mean taste of the Middle East. I don't mean just by association. So let's rock and roll. And I'm going to say straight away that this is not one of my wine recommendations, but if you can find it and get it to make its way to you on the Christmas dinner table, you should absolutely do that. Very difficult to open bottles from a position of being bedridden. So, may the force be with us, beautiful community. This is a high alcohol wine. It's 14.7. And this is 60% Syrah, 20% Cab, 20% Merlot, very roughly speaking. So, ooh, beautiful community. Brick dust. Wonderful, evocative note of sweet balsamic vinegar. Now, of course, with wine, flavor profiles are always secondary to texture. But sometimes when they're particularly distinct, it's worth pointing it out. So the nose is absolutely gorgeous with blueberries, violets. I'm going to score these wines, by the way, and this is my scoring system. Not my scoring system, but the way I use the conventional 100-point scoring system. It's exponential. So I rank wines between 87 and 100, but to move from 97 to 98 is aesthetically like climbing Mount Everest. So the higher you get, the more moving by 1 point up feels like moving by 10 points up. So let's see where we are. It's rich, but it's got lovely freshness. It's velvety texturally. It's got high acid and is more than refreshing enough to compensate for the 14.7% booze heaviness. Got a lovely strangeness of Middle Eastern spice, and then some sort of boiled cherry skins, perhaps. Wonderful sugar crystal sort of coverage of the palate on the back end. And this is really nicely done. It's modernist. It's not a wine that, except for the transportational flavor profiles, has something genuinely remarkable to say. But it's impossible not to love this. And it's a wonderful wine if you can find it around Christmas. As I said, this is not a recommendation. We've just tasted it because we want to think of folks doing remarkable work under challenging conditions. So I'm going to score this wine 92 points. Lebanon. Many people say that Bargelous is the Middle East's greatest wine. It isn't. Chateau Moussa by country mile is the Middle East's best wine. But recent vintages have been a lot more modernist, because Moussa from about 10 years ago would taste much more medium-bodied and freaky in the good sense, than Bargelous. But it might be that with the recent more modernist turn at Moussa, that Bargelous is now the more strange and evocative and transportational wine. So let's rock and roll. This is a half bottle. There's not enough of these on the market, beautiful community, because it's very conducive to two people or a single person enjoying a wine. And this is Cab with Cinsault and Carignan. Can we beat Bargelous? Much less evocative nose, much more subtle, but that can be normal. A 2017 Moussa is a very, very young wine. It needs more time. A little bit of a hint of red berries, brick dust. Not overwhelming, just a subtle hint of brick dust. And not much else on the nose. Let's try it. Lots of low register spices, star anise, cinnamon, but actually more the kind of spices we might be more familiar with in Europe. Much, much less exotic profile. This wine is not transportational at all, I must say. It's only going to transport you because you think, oh, I'm drinking a Lebanese wine. That wine, if you had no idea where it was from, would still transport you to the Middle East. I'm 89 points on this. It's a little bit vacant in the mid-palate as it stands. It could develop that mid-palate density later. And we've just got a kind of gentle, fairly neutral, with good enough acid presentation of low register spices and red berried fruit. Not as much going on here as I would have liked. So it's a total and unbelievable obliteration in serious favor on this occasion. Let's go to Ukraine, beautiful community. So, biologist, 15 minutes drive outside of Kiev. They've got vineyards in the Kiev area. They've got some vineyards in the Odessa area. They are making this orange blend. It's white wine made with skin contact out of Aligoté, Tramina, and Chardonnay. Come on, Ukraine. Can you bring the thunder? We just had a slight Lebanese disappointment. Can Ukraine bring some thunder to our Christmas table? When there's a wax top on the bottle, it's just good to cut all the way through it. Beautiful color, beautiful community. Look at that. A lovely amber. Wow. Elderflower and a lovely richness on the nose with acacia honey. Maybe a little bit of boozy plum compote, but let's bring it in. We're much better on the nose than we're on the mouth. The nose is absolutely enchanting for an entry-level orange wine. And it evokes the sense that you're going to get something really plush and texturally rich. Whereas on the palate, you actually get something really linear, crisp, very short. The wine goes, and then nothing happens beyond a certain point. And so is it a disappointment on the palate? Relative to the nose, it is, but the nose is itself lovely, and that's a strength. The disjointedness between the nose and the palate is a flaw of the wine, and it generally makes it have a certain kind of amateurish ring, but it's clean and it's honest. You know, a lot of wines that are made in this natural style try too hard to express a kind of mysterious authenticity, and you feel the trying in the glass rather than the genuineness. This is completely genuine. This is completely unpretentious. It's totally real, and you want to like it. I'm not saying it because it's a Ukrainian wine. It's genuinely likable. On the palate, it's short. It's a bit linear. The flavor profiles are much more green herbs, apricots, and more even apricot juice than apricot yogurt. You'd expect something yogurty and rich in the glass on the basis of the nose, but that's not what you get. So it's strange, but there's absolutely nothing pretentious about it. And its awkwardness is kind of lovable. I'm really 87 points on this wine, but I like it a lot. So I'm going to get it up to about 88, if not even 89, on the fact that it's delightful and completely unpretentious. Let's now get to our proper wine recommendations for Christmas, and I'm going to clear this beautiful community. Hello. No, I don't need to say hello, beautiful community. We've just been together. I have been away for a few hours because me crashed a little bit after the messing around with the wine, crashed a bit with my health, even though I didn't swallow any wine. But now I'm back and we are ready to make wine recommendations. Let's do it in a few categories, starting with the most difficult one, which is the abstract category. Don't name me any names, but tell me what a good category is for me to look out for. And the problem with that question, even though it's the most common question that's asked, is that it's a bit like recommending a part of a city to somebody and telling them go out for dinner there. Well, there are going to be a lot of restaurants there, and some of them are going to be terrible and some of them are going to be great. So you need to recommend a section of a city where there's not just a good layer at the top, but there's a strength and depth and a consistency that allows somebody not to have a bad experience if they check something out blind. So let's start with whites. My white recommendation in this blind category would be South African Chenin Blanc. because there's a great strength in depth, and there are a lot of producers from Alhai to Lagerenberg, there are 20 others who make wonderful wines in that 20 to 40 buck price range. And these are wines that are underpriced. They will cost a lot more 5 years from now. But there's enormous value to be had there. And I never recommend just reaching for wine blind, but if you're going to, I think that's a really good punt. My second best white punt would be a Ligoté from Burgundy, because you can get an Aligoté for, 20 to 30 bucks from producers like Bataille or Chavichouet, whose higher end wines are going to cost, 100 euros and much more. And the principle there is that 80% of the time, it's true that when a good artisanal producer makes a wine that is much cheaper than the rest of their range, they're going to take care of it with a serious ethical commitment. That's going to mean you're not going to get something that's a dud, even if they don't make any money on that bottle. Third tip would be Listan Blanco from Tenerife. From a producer like Envinate, for instance, you can get some really good white wines, which are going to be both striking and volcanic and underpriced. Of course, another stunning category is Muscadet. It's probably the cheapest high quality white wine category in the world. And then maybe sherry, where you can genuinely get almost remarkable wines in that price range we're talking about, because it's such a disrespected category. Okay, let's do reds blind. I would say a strong starting place might be entry-level wines from good producers in Piedmont. Probably Dolcetto above all, from producers like Vaira or Borlotto, but also other varietals. You can get a Baby Nebbiolo or Langhe Nebbiolo from a good producer, or even a Fraser. So that's my number one tip. Do I have a number two tip? I think Greece, Xinomavro from Greece. Now, a few years ago, I would have said that the world's best white wine value was Azyrtiko from Santorini in Greece, but prices have gone up. Conditions have become much more challenging. The climate crisis is much more prominent now, and so it's no longer a budget category. But Xinomavro from producers like Alpha Estate or Themopoulos are still extremely cheap and deliver tremendous value. Our second kind of wine recommendation is going to be actually just as wacky. We're going to pick 2 or 3 countries that the beautiful community come from, and per country, I'm going to attempt to give a recommendation for a relatively budget wine that over-delivers, a nutty wine that's somehow soulful, and a high-end wine if you've got a special occasion, or you're going to splurge, or you're not on a normal salary. 20 to 30% of us come from the United States, so let's try. The United States is difficult to talk about because it is by far the greatest winemaking country in the world outside of Europe. To the point that, and folks from New Zealand and Argentina are going to be throwing darts at me for this, but if you put the entire winemaking world outside of Europe against the US, it'll be competitive. And the US might even win. So it's an amazing wine culture. If you move the US to Europe, it would compete strongly for third place. It'll be third or fourth. Possibly third, actually, behind Italy and far, far behind France. But France and Italy are the 2 greatest winemaking countries in the world by far. So the US is remarkable. And the wine culture in the US is in many ways healthier than in Europe, because in Europe we really struggle with conservatism, and we also struggle with insecurity because we are accountable to traditions by the standards of which we often fail.
So there's something healthy in the United States. I must say we're relaxing and becoming better at this in Paris and London. But certainly over the last 10, 20 years, you could make a very strong case that New York was a much healthier wine capital than Paris or Rome or London. So let's try. I mean, we could list 100 wines per each category, but let's just try. Budget US wine that's going to over deliver. It's going to be age worthy if you want that, and it's going to be fairly easily available. I'm going to go for a somewhat conservative choice, but it's justified, and that's the Geyserville or the Lytton Springs Zinfandels from Ridge Vineyards. Ridge wines remain relatively underpriced, and they are classic. They often straddle the old and the new world. And when you drink a Ridge Zin, it'll often taste more like a fairly classic Bordeaux than like an image you might have of what you expect from a California Zinfandel. Let's go nutty now. There's a lot of nutty wine, that's to say artisanal wine that's also funky fun. Sometimes people call it natural wine, made in the United States, in so many different regions. But the one I'm going to pick is made by a woman called Deirdre, and the winery is called La Garagista. And I in particular recommend her white and sparkling wines, which have the profile of an evocative garden with a kind of bracing freshness of high-pitched green herbs. If you are conservative in your palate, you're going to find the wines wacky. You'll think it's some kind of juiced up cider. So be careful. And I think your laws are so complex. You can order wines from some states, but not others. But you could order Garagista wines on the website from their home in Vermont. For a classic wine, I'm going to just cop out because it's too much and probably name the Ridge Montebello. But it's a wine that needs age, and so there's no point drinking it young. You better save money and drink the Zins. We could have also named the Thomas Pinot Noir from Oregon. Many of the projects that Rajat Par is associated with, some of them are going to be actually budget wines, some of them are going to be more expensive. And could have also named the projects associated with Christophe Baron. So there's a lot of great wine being made, and I've sort of made a slightly lame conservative choice. But let's pathetically say we've done the United States. UK. About 10 to 15% of the community comes from the UK, and this is easy. It's easy because I'm patriotic about the UK wine trade, and because our wine trade is in its infancy in many ways. Today, in my judgment, the best producer in the UK that's working on a serious scale is Anna and Dermot Sugru, and I recommend anything they make. I think as a bonus in that category, I could name the Seyval Blancs of Peter Hall if they have a little bit of age on them. You can also get those off their website. The man behind Breaky Bottom, Peter Hall, died recently. I'm going to do a little obituary of him on the chat channel and just say a little bit about wine and culture. I'm going to bridge the nutty and the budget category for the UK and say Black Book. Black Book make a lot of excellent underpriced wines, and in particular their Chardonnays are both underpriced and excellent. And their Pygmalion Chardonnay, which still costs under £30, is one of the best in the country, easily, and is also a little nutty in the positive sense that it's going to remind you more of a Jura rather than a Burgundy Chardonnay. Let's do one more. Australia. For budget and value, I'm going to name Brash Higgins. The producer is Brad Hickey. And these don't have great distribution outside of Australia, but you're going to see them everywhere in Australia. Not because the quantity is big, but because they do get around. You will see these wines. They're fairly easily accessible from reputable wine establishments. And I recommend the entire range, but in particular, I'd recommend the Zibibo orange wine, the Nero Diavola. Many people now make Nero Diavola in the McLaren Vale, where this winery comes from. But a lot of them still do it wine school style, whereas Brad does it with a deep understanding of what lessons you need to draw from Sicily, how you need to proceed artisanally, what kind of patience you need. And so it's a beautiful project that could go places over the next century. They even have a Vanjon, which I never tasted from bottle, but I tasted it from barrel many, many years ago when my health was less bad. For craziness, there's a lot of craziness in Australia, a lot of nuttiness, a lot of great nuttiness, a lot of really excellent pet nat sparkling wines that are nutty. But I am going to recommend the orange sparkling wines of Anton von Klopper from South Australia, from the Adelaide Hills, I think. Anton is nuts. His wines are nuts, and some of his wines that are nuts are truly delicious. High end, well, everybody knows about Australia's great Shirazes. And everybody thinks that they're Australia's greatest wines. They're not. Australia's greatest wine is the Jaconda Chardonnay. And it's probably the best Chardonnay in the world outside of Europe. Now, if you put it in the context of Burgundy, it wouldn't be one of the 50 best Chardonnays. Although, you never know. So let's be conservative. It wouldn't be one of the 20 best Chardonnays. But then the Burgundy Chardonnays will be even more expensive than the Jaconda. So it's actually reasonable value in that context. So it's an important cultural institution in Australia. It's very rare that, in a country like Australia, there's a wine of that level of finesse and sophistication. There's no reason why there shouldn't be more, but it's truly great, and it's something that the tiny part of me that feels Aussie, because I used to live in Australia, something that I'm very, very proud of. So these are my country tips. Final, very brief category. Great wines from anywhere that could cost a couple of hundred, but actually cost $50. This is difficult, and it would be unethical to do that on a big channel with a wine audience, because that would, create a market for these wines and make them unavailable. Because most of the wine content online, funnily enough, is about trying to get people into the wine world. But in reality, with the world's finest wines, we've got a situation where the people who love them most actually can't afford them. And even the few lucky people who can afford them can't get an allocation because there's too few to go around. So we don't want to boost too much a signal for gems out there that people aren't aware of. But today, what costs $50 that will cost 200 and could cost 200? I think in Burgundy, it might be the white wines of Jean-Marc Vincent, who is an absolute maniac. I mean, this is a man who made astonishingly imaginative and consistent viticultural innovations over a course of pretty much 30 years with no financial reward. I mean, you need to be nuts to do it. It's a sort of a reckless act of creative fanaticism. And really only from the 2020 vintage did we begin to fully see the fruits of his labor, for a couple of decades. And he's only now beginning to be rewarded, but still not rewarded enough. These are still under the radar. So that would be one thing, the wines from Jean-Marc Vincent, who is in Fontenay. Now, another choice would be the Vauvrays, which are Chenin Blancs from Domaine Huet. And another choice would be the Sauvignons from Cottard, another great Loire producer. And I'm really struggling for reds. If I can think of any, I'm going to put them on the screen. If I can think of wines that are crazily underpriced relative to quality. I don't know. I don't know how this has been for you, beautiful community. Obviously, if you hate wine, this has been a big waste of your time. But this was my Christmas wine tips video. Lots of love.